Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at the Listening Post. This week, Operation Moshtarak.
The Afghan flag was raised over the town of Marjan.
NATO and its allies change the way they tell the story of the war. Iceland, the country that wants to become a safe haven for journalists threatened by libel laws. Another British newspaper sold to a Russian for just £1 sterling. And if you want your video to go viral...
Don't think yours is going to be viral, because no one's probably going to watch it.
We have a viral video...
Make it short.
...that will teach you how.
50 seconds.
Even before the latest NATO military offensive in Afghanistan began, correspondents, editors, and defense analysts were all being told that Operation Moshtarak was going to be a big one. The media campaign conducted in the run-up to the military push was different. It was one part declaration of strength, one part strategic change of approach, at least on the information side. In 8 years of fighting in the country, the combined NATO and allied forces have found they tend to lose support amongst Afghans, not just over civilian casualties, but often due to the very public denial of responsibility by Western forces for those casualties. So Operation Moshtarak was more than just a military offensive. It marked a significant change by NATO and its allies in how they deal with the media and handle their public relations. Afghanistan is where we begin this week, with a war story and the way it is being told to the Afghans affected and news audiences around the world.
Kandahar Air Base has got busier.
The military normally like to use the element of surprise.
Planes are going on reconnaissance missions, gathering intelligence for Operation Moshtarak.
This was very different.
This is an enormous operation, the largest in this Afghan conflict.
Well, what's really been different is that they've told the Taliban, they've told everybody what they were planning to do before they did it.
This is being called the largest military operation in nearly 9 years.
It was really more of propaganda to show that international forces are stronger.
By announcing Operation Moshtarak weeks before launching it, NATO forces did surrender the element of surprise, but they gained something as well.
And that gave the Taliban time to prepare their defences, but crucially it also gave local people living there the opportunity and the time to leave if they wanted to. And so that's, in terms of their communication strategy, been one of the key differences of Operation Moshtarak.
The idea, the military say, was to try and prepare the population and limit the number of civilian casualties. But I think there was also another reason. This whole operation was supposed to be a showcase operation to show ISAF doing things a different way, a chance for the NATO forces to seize the initiative.
With 3 objectives for the future of Afghanistan.
NATO forces took the initiative, and if things went wrong, they reacted quickly. When 39 civilians were killed in 2 incidents, NATO commander Stanley McChrystal immediately apologized to Afghanis through a translator.
The good point about this message was, in the past, when the coalition forces were causing some civilian casualties, they were kind of denying or giving the lower number. And that was something very sad, because people that they were living in that area, they could easily see that the NATO planes were coming, bombing and killing, and then on the news that they were hearing something different.
I can remember similar incidents in 2006, 2007, 2008, where the military, for days, despite the fact there were television pictures showing the bodies of women and children, innocent civilians who died in NATO attacks, was still saying that those responsible were Taliban, and only after days, sometimes weeks, did they finally apologize. That's now changed under McChrystal.
General McChrystal's apology, such a forthright apology on television, was unusual, and so far they seem to have avoided the worst of the reaction.
And I think for the Afghan people, and I'm one of Afghans, it makes a lot of difference for us that if somebody admits that he did something wrong, although it was very bad, but at least he admits it and he says sorry for it. So that makes a lot of difference.
But nonetheless, you can't overestimate the damage that civilian casualties do. And ordinary people, they don't talk about it in the euphemisms like civilian casualties. These are people's brothers, people's daughters, people's friends who are being killed, and people right across Afghanistan obviously acutely aware of that and very uncomfortable with it.
It's a command wire that was linked to 30 pounds of explosives.
One aspect of the coverage that has not changed, the bulk of the military side of the story, as reported in Western media, was delivered by correspondents embedded with American and British forces.
We are embedded with the 1st Battalion, 6th Marines Alpha Company.
I think it's been very hard for local journalists is that all the attention of the military goes to the big Western news organisations. what got forgotten in all this, again, was the Afghan media.
In this operation, Afghan media were not able to really go down in Marja from where the other international media were reporting, because they were with the Afghan forces and they didn't have enough helicopters and other means to really take them down to that areas. So they had to wait for days until they got access to those areas.
And the Afghan journalists who did try and get onto the front line through the Afghan army with their forces found it very, very difficult.
And when the international forces do make the effort to get news to Afghans, it does not always work. The barriers are not necessarily political, even cultural. Sometimes they're technological.
Well, I recently got an email from one of the PR chiefs of the NATO operation, very keen that I looked at their new website for the training of the Afghan army. They said they had some great stuff on it, and I think that is a laudable thing to be trying to get their message across using new media. But the reality is this: Afghans do not have access to the internet. Most Afghans live in rural areas. Most don't have access to television.
This was the image that NATO forces and their allies wanted the world to see. The Afghan flag being raised in Marja, territory captured from the Taliban. It went all over the world, and if you missed it on the mainstream media, it was available on the Pentagon's own network.
That is a symbolic occasion, a symbolic event that NATO and the Afghans seem very eager for the media to see.
But you know, when it comes to the flag, you can really go and occupy one building and just secure the building and just put your flag on the top of the roof. It does not mean you completely have the area in your control.
And that can be the case whether it's a symbol going up or a symbol coming down. Not every picture tells the full story, be it in Iraq or Afghanistan. Here's how our Global Village voices see the media story coming out of Afghanistan.
The American media has pretty much pushed the war and General McChrystal's apology to the back pages. And with Democrats and Republicans generally in agreement on President Obama's Afghan strategy, and this may be the only thing on which they agree, it seems likely that the war will continue to be ignored at least until the mainstream media hits a slow news day.
The concentration on the Hearts and Minds operation is important, but it's a distraction from two broader strategic issues which don't get much look at in the media. The first is that 9/11 itself was intended likely to bring American forces into Afghanistan as a trap, and secondly that even now the Americans don't have unity of command. They have one part of the Afghan operation run from Florida and another part from Belgium, and that in itself is a recipe for long-term disaster. And the inability of the media to take up either of these two critical issues makes it very difficult for the public in the West and internationally to understand what's going on.
We see our Global Village Voices as a new digital kind of letter to the editor. If you'd like to share your views on the news media, the best way to get in touch for that is through Facebook and Twitter. Look for the Listening Post page on those sites and we will let you know what stories we're working on. Or you can just get in touch with us the old-fashioned way. Our email address is listeningpost@aljazeera.net anytime you want to get with the program. It's time now for Listening Post News Bites. The row in Denmark over those newspaper cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad, the ones that enraged so many Muslims, is back in the news. One of the papers that published the cartoons back in 2006, Politiken, has issued an apology for the affront that the cartoons caused. Politiken apologized in exchange for having a legal case against the paper dropped. The case was being brought by a number of groups who claim to speak for more than 94,000 of Muhammad's descendants. Politiken has been roundly criticized for its about-face on this issue. The editor of Jyllands-Posten, the first paper to publish the cartoons, called it a sad day for the Danish press. And politicians, not just those from the Danish right, were also tough on the paper, saying that the media carry offensive material every day, and that's part of what freedom of speech is all about. The British media landscape is changing, starting with the world's largest news organization, the BBC. The Beeb wants to cut the cost of running the service by 25%, cut its web output by 50%, and it's announced the closure of one radio station as well as its Asian network. All of this comes as part of a strategic review. Media watchers in the UK say the review was designed by BBC executives to preempt possible cuts by the Conservative Party, led by David Cameron, who are ahead in the polls in the run-up to the upcoming election. The Conservatives have made it clear that they want less money spent on the publicly funded broadcaster. Meanwhile, the leader of Britain's National Union of Journalists, Jeremy Dear, is saying that the NUJ will fight cuts to the BBC with all its might. At the current exchange rate, £1 sterling is worth about $1.50 US. £1 will also get you one copy of the British newspaper The Independent. Or, if you're an acquisitive Russian press baron, £1 will buy you the entire newspaper. Alexander Lebedyev, who bought the London Evening Standard for £1 last year, is doing the same with The Independent. But part of the deal requires Lebedyev to invest millions into the paper over the next 5 years. The Independent, which was launched in 1986 as a middle-of-the-road alternative in the UK's ideologically polarized newspaper scene, has since lurched to the political left, seen its circulation dwindle, and its annual losses are now a reported $15 million. They're keeping a close eye on this transaction at The Guardian, whose sales Lebedyev might try to undermine by turning The Independent into a free paper the way he did with The Standard. The U.S. military has decided to give peace with the world of social networking a chance. The Pentagon has looked at sites like Twitter and Facebook with suspicion, but it now says it will allow military personnel to use those sites as long as what they do there does not adversely affect operational security. The relationship between the Pentagon and new web communications technology is an uneasy one. A couple of years back, it banned personnel from putting videos up on YouTube and created something called TroopTube, which was easier for the Pentagon to monitor but does not reach nearly as many viewers. Web watchers in Italy are scratching their heads trying to figure out just what a recent court ruling there means for the future of video sharing. A court in Milan convicted 3 Google executives of violating privacy laws over a disturbing video posted back in 2006. The video, since taken down, showed an autistic teenager being bullied by 4 boys at a school in northern Italy. Prosecutors argued that Google broke Italian privacy law by not seeking the consent of all the parties involved before allowing the video to go online. The 3 men were given suspended sentences, but Google says it will appeal the conviction nonetheless because of the precedent this may set. Richard Thomas, a former British Information Commissioner, had an interesting take on the ruling. He called it ridiculous. It's a bit like prosecuting the post office for hate mail that's sent through the post. We're back after the break with a look at Iceland, a country that wants journalists to come in from the cold.